Now, we've seen a lot of examples of solid code, how to define if the code is solid or not, and what are potential fixes to make. There are some tools that may help you with that, not necessarily fix for you, but show weaker places. And in this video, I was thinking quite a lot how to plan this video because I want to show you 3 tools for static analysis and also discuss some metrics related to those. But I will make it one longer video because it's all interconnected and it's better to watch this video all in one so you will get the full picture. So there will be 3 tools mentioned in this video: Larastan, PHP Insights, and PHP Metrics. And Larastan is, by the way, a wrapper for Laravel from PHPStan. So all of those 3 tools are actually PHP tools, not Laravel. But if we're talking about solid, we're actually talking about PHP code. And I tested those tools for static analysis on 3 open source projects, which is Coil Music Service, then Creator Invoice app, and Laravel.io portal forum. I cloned all of them locally and launched the tools to check the code. And that checking of the code is basically going through the files. In all cases, I've tested the app folder, which is the main in Laravel, where we write all our code for classes and object-oriented programming. And it shows something like this. So some potential errors, potential downsides, and things to fix. Let's take a look. All 3 tools are really easy to install in the Laravel project. So Larastan is just composer require, and then you need to create a file called phpstan.neon with this example with default parameters, but I advise to make it a bit different. So if I go to my phpstan.neon here, I've changed the level from 5 to 6. To see the type hints missing, and then I don't need to ignore errors or exclude some paths, so I just deleted that from the configuration. So we're checking the app folder for static analysis with Larastan. How does it work? We launch the command vendor bin phpstan analyze, and let's see what we have for the Coil project. Okay, so it found 89 errors, and it seems like quite a lot, but don't get discouraged. Majority of those errors are just warnings or advice how to improve some stuff, and there are a lot of so-called false positives where you don't necessarily have to change anything, and actually a lot of those static analysis tools show just general improvements, but looking at the code, there's nothing to improve or it's questionable. So personally, I would use Larastan for finding the violations of L letter in the solid principle, so Liskov substitution principles, which means there are no return type hints specified or no parameters, or something is wrong with parameters, they are not within the same type. But then again, there are a lot of false positives here. So if the method can return model or can return collection, it's pretty hard to type hint everything correctly, because for example, it returns song null, but it should return model null. Song is the model, so it's kind of a false positive. And instead, let's take a look at a few examples. I've opened the project in the background, for example, has parameter timestamp with no type hint specified. Let's open Last.fm service. I've opened it now, and the method scrollable has this. In ideal scenario, you should type hint all the parameters, and they did in the string variables, but timestamp, PHP doesn't have any type for timestamp. So what should it say? String? Probably, but not necessarily. So I don't consider that a violation. Also other stuff. Streamer interface stream, let's take a look. And in here, in this project, they even specified PHP CS ignore, which is PHP code sniffer, another tool which I will not show in this video, but they used it apparently, which means that it would ignore that the return type is missing. Probably there is some reason for that, because it may return different types, or maybe the type isn't in the PHP types. So Larastan in this case will show you quite a lot of things missing, but you don't necessarily have to fix them. Is just a warning or more like advice. Let's go to another tool. It's called PHP Insights, and let's launch that on the same Coil project. Again, it's really easy to install, composer require, and by the way, it's from the same author, Nuno Maduro, official Laravel employee, Laravel team member. So he created both Larastan and PHP Insights, and to run PHP Insights, we just go and do vendor bin PHP Insights. And first it would show percentage of scores of different types of data, and you can read more about those in the PHP Insights documentation. But I will stop on a few things related to solid in this video, and specifically on cyclomatic complexity. But we will get to that in a minute. So first, it's an overview, and I don't even know which numbers are good or bad here, those percentages. Probably the closer to 100% the better, but generally you should kind of ignore those numbers and go to the actual issues. So if you click enter, it will show you code issues, which will be similar to Laristan, by the way, some of them. Type hints, and then there are 48 issues omitted with the same error, with the same advice or warning, then unused parameter, then you can scroll down and have some more things. So these are general things that the PHP Insights noticed in your code, not necessarily related to solid principles, but something you have missed maybe. And I don't want to stop on the code too much. I want to discuss complexity and architecture. So if we click enter again, we go to complexity. And here we have complexity with warning message, having classes with more than 5 cyclomatic complexity. And what is cyclomatic complexity and why should we care about that? This is measured by the method, and the best definition that I found is from PHPMD Mess Detector, another tool. And this is a code example. So the more if statements or else or switches or for or while loops you have, the more branches your method has. And with every if, it adds one more point to cyclomatic complexity. So it's listed here: if, while, for, and case mostly. So for each method, 1 to 4 is low complexity, it's fine. 5 to 7 indicates moderate, and 8 to 10 is high and even higher. So this one is quite a mess in the code. Don't you agree? So if you have any more than 5 cyclomatic complexity within one method, it's kind of a bad practice and you need to refactor something. So PHP Insights shows the cyclomatic complexity, but for the classes, which I personally don't necessarily agree. If we go to PHP Streamer file, what do we have here? Try catch is another complexity actually, but that's okay. This one is not violation, it's just catching a lot of different errors. Yes, it is branching of the code, but that's exactly the point. So again, those static analysis tools show quite a lot of false positives. Or if we go to another example, for example, util with 11 cyclomatic complexity, here's what it has. So for the class, as I understand, the cyclomatic complexity is the sum of all the complexities of all the methods. So yes, in here, detect, UTF, encoding, you have a lot of switch cases. So this is one complexity, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then in another method we have these, and these are kind of if statements. So defined or define, it's kind of an if statement. So 5 more statements for complexity. So it makes that file flagged as too complex by PHP Insights. And in here, I don't really agree. And we will get to cyclomatic complexity a bit later with tool number 3. So for now, you need to just understand what that cyclomatic complexity is, and we will get more practical in a few minutes. For now, let's go to architecture issues. We click. And in here, I want to point out the function length. Another kind of a false positive, because PHP Insights by default is configured to flag the functions longer than 20 lines of code. So there are 19 issues and 3 those, so 22 issues in the full code, where functions are longer than 20 lines. And I don't agree with that configuration. 20 lines is still okay, and even 30 lines are still okay. Related question: how many lines is okay? Is there any standard? Is there any red flag? When you need to refactor function or class? Let's discuss a bit. So first let's go to transcoding streamer file and let's see what it has inside and is it really something wrong with it. So some function is longer than 20 lines, probably this one, okay. But see, even those 20 lines, so these are kind of 8 lines, and it could be 1 line if you do it inline. So quite often the amount of lines is so misleading, because it's the way how you format the lines. So I don't see anything wrong with this function at all. It's clear, it's readable, it's short. And while researching for this course, what is the line length for PHP projects, for Laravel, or for whatever, I didn't find any one clear standard. So different tools define different configurations, and let me show you a few examples. So for example, one Reddit post asked, is it a hard limit of 200 lines per class and 30 lines per method? And basically people answer that no, the hard limit is bad. Hard limit doesn't make sense. Probably in theory, classes longer than 200 lines should be considered for refactoring maybe, but it's not a hard limit. If you have like thousands of lines in class, then probably, yeah, you do have a problem, but within hundreds, it's totally fine. Another article which is totally not about PHP or Laravel from Java Zone and from 2013, but it's discussing various principles in various languages because there are different configurations. So for example, PMD static analysis tools flags only the methods with 100 lines and 1000 lines per class, so it's much more flexible. And 10 methods in one class is also an interesting configuration, but a different tool suggests 50 lines in one method and 1,500 lines in class. So it's really different how you see those numbers. It's not a hard limit. It's not something that you aim for. The number of lines should not be the goal of how you code. But that article, for example, is concluded with rule of 30. So 30 sub-elements, in this case 30 code lines per method, 30 methods per class, and then on the bigger level if you have packages, subsystems and stuff like that. So rule of 30 may be kind of a rule of thumb, but that's also only one theory, only one suggestion. Instead of looking at the number, you should look at something else. And I found quite a great explanation on Stack Overflow. What are the conditions under which you need to consider refactoring the method? So it's not about being too long, it's more about being too complex. And here are the rules. Not the rules, but suggestions in no particular order. Deeply nested control structures. It's the same as cyclomatic complexity. Too many parameters that define how methods work. So too many parameters is also kind of a red flag. Then logic, which is duplicated in other methods. So don't repeat yourself principle. And also I wanted to point out like the human-friendly metric. Your massive display isn't big enough to display a method. So if a method doesn't fit on your developer screen, that is kind of a red flag. In my case in PHP Storm, I have a font of 24 to make it like zoomed on the videos. But if you have like regular font of like 14 or 12 or whatever, and if one method doesn't fit on your screen, that is quite a red flag. And also I like this definition, you cannot immediately determine the function's purpose. So this is where we get back to single responsibility principle of Solid. If the method isn't clear what it does, like one thing, one responsibility, if it's not the case, then you may consider refactoring. So with the metrics discussed, we can go to the third tool called PHP Metrics. And it can be installed globally with Composer Global Require, and then you run PHP Metrics and it is saved as HTML files, as folder with HTML files, which gives a report like this. So for Coil project, it is saved in this folder, and if I open index.php, I have a full HTML page, static HTML page with a lot of analysis. And in terms of Solid, I want to emphasize two sub-reports, two menu items. First, size and volume. It will flag which classes are kind of too big. And the metric here is LLOC, which is logical lines of code. And in this case, init command is the only class which reaches 200 lines. There are more parameters and you can read of them, you can Google what they mean, but I don't want to make this video even longer. Basically, logical lines of code is the metric that you should take a look at, and init command, let's take a look what's inside. Let's take a look. A lot of parameters, constructor, handle, everything is separated, maybe generate, that's a good function name, maybe generate. So migrate, try catch, if, this comment, no, haven't found it. So setup database is a private function. And again, this is 1 line or 6 lines, something like that. So a lot of private functions. It may be potentially refactored into some other classes, but if it's an artisan command and those functions are relevant only for that artisan command, why would you move it somewhere else? So a lot of private methods. So in total we have 330 lines of code, so logical ones are 200. And I don't see anything wrong with this class. It doesn't violate any single responsibility principle because that class is responsible for initialization of the project as I understand it. But generally PHP Metrics points you to the exact classes that you need to take a look at and you check that. And this is probably the best tool out of those 3 that I show you to point the exact potential victims for you to check. And another report from the PHP Metrics, which I would call is complexity and defects. And here there are classes listed with quite a lot of parameters, and you need to order that. That's, by the way, clickable. Max, method, cyclomatic complexity. So you can order by descending and order by ascending. I'm not sure if you see that. I'll try to zoom it in my browser. So this, you can see that the class file synchronizer, some of the methods, has 13 cyclomatic complexity. And this is quite a red flag, but let's see what's inside. File synchronizer. Okay, we're in file synchronizer and let's scroll through that. So constructor isn't complex, set file isn't complex, that's short. relatively short. Sync is, yeah, so see, this is interesting. Here, it's quite a good suggestion, not necessarily a false positive. So if one if statement, then another if statement with return, then another if statement, then another if statement, and then inside of that if, there's another if. Inside of that, there's another if else. So another else here, another if here. So this is maybe a potential candidate for refactoring because it doesn't fit on the screen. Well, my screen is a bit smaller because of a big font, and there are a lot of comments. Maybe they are enough to avoid refactoring, but it generally is quite complicated to understand what exactly this method does. It's file synchronizer sync, and the description is sync the song with all available media info against the database. Probably makes sense if you work on that project, but if I'm, for example, a new developer and need to fix the bug somewhere inside of this method, I would need to probably spend quite a lot of time to understand all the consequences and in which if-else block I need to work in. So this is quite a good example where PHP metrics shows exactly where to look at for method cyclomatic complexity, and this is probably the most practical out of those three tools. Complexity, exactly the file where to look, and exactly where to check. Now let's briefly take a look at how those three tools, what numbers do they show for other open source projects, Crater and Laravel.io. So Crater PHP Stan Analyze, 1000 errors, which is huge amount, but the thing is with that project there were almost no type hints at all anywhere. My theory is that this project was created before the type hints arrived in PHP at all with PHP 7, or it was intentionally made that it would be able to run on earlier PHP versions. So it's all over the place, so no return type hints, no parameters, and that may be okay, but I would advise to stick to solid principles and specify type hints in all your project. Now same will launch PHP Insights for that Crater. Again, some numbers with percentages, code issues. There are some return assignments, unused parameters, no empty comments, so empty comments are here somewhere. So a lot of small issues here and there. Complexity is again classes with cyclomatic complexity, which I don't agree with. You shouldn't analyze it for classes, you should analyze it for methods. Architecture issues. And by the way, all of those checks are configurable for all of those tools. You can define some parameters, what to check, what not to check, which are the parameters. So check out the documentation for those tools. Again, function length, 87 functions are longer than 20 lines, but 30, 38 or 49 lines of code, it's totally not a red flag. And if we take a look at the report by PHP metrics here, we open index.html, and we see this, we go to size and volume. There's one method with 389 lines of code, which is invoice, and it may be too long. But for models, it's quite a typical thing. If you want to use all the eloquent features, you have a lot of getters and setters, you have a lot of relationships, you have a lot of things. So I guess this is exactly the case. So for invoice model, there's a lot of constants, casts, appends, then set something, get something, relationship, a lot of relationships, get something, some private function which may be extracted into some helper potentially. But again, get something, get formatted, this and that. Then scopes, if you use scopes, and various scopes for search, for where order, for applying the filters. Maybe this one is a potential refactoring client or victim. And I'm pretty sure it would be flagged in the cyclomatic complexity report. But again, scope, create invoice. Well, this one, I would refactor this out of the model. I would create some kind of invoice service, to be honest, because this is not a model responsibility. It even calls the model. It calls invoice create. Let's scroll down a bit, update invoice. So same thing. I would probably get those two out of the model, and it will give back like 100 lines of code, maybe not 100, maybe 50. And then what else? Send, not sure if it's a model responsibility. Create items, right, create taxes. So okay, At first I thought it was totally like Eloquent model, but then those functions which are down below, I would probably extract them into somewhere else, because it's not just about invoice model with invoice Eloquent features, but it's also about invoice items, invoice taxes, so it's violating single responsibility principle. So it's good that PHP Metrics flagged that 300 lines is bad. Not necessarily 300 lines is bad, but while analyzing those 300 lines, we found something to refactor. And if we go to complexity and defects, order by max method complexity, and guess what? Invoice is here with the method that we've seen before just now, right? And in general, there are quite a lot of models with 10 or so complexity, which may be okay, but those may be candidates for potential refactoring. Now let's quickly run those on Laravel.io project. Larastan, what does it show us? 200 errors with no return type hit specified. For example, let's go to GitHub user. And yes, indeed, in GitHub user get doesn't have the return type hint. It is potentially a thing to fix, so not really a false positive. And there are more no return type hint specified, so it's kind of a potential things to fix. Now let's run PHP Insights. What will it show? In fact, bigger numbers, bigger percentage points for complexity and architecture, but I think that Laravel.io as a forum, it's a bit more simple project than those before, than the Coel and the Crater, but that's just on the surface. I may be wrong here. Let's go to complexity issues immediately. Again, classes with 5 cyclomatic complexity, but there are only 6 or 8, so there's no 10 complexity or something. That's probably a good sign. Function length. This is quite an interesting one. Only 2 issues plus 3, so only 5 issues where functions are longer than 20 lines at all. Again, it's a bit smaller project, but probably it's a good sign that the author of Laravel.io took care of the functions be as small as possible. And if we take a look at the report by PHP Metrics again, index.html, and we go to size and volume, and again we have 3 models which are bigger than 100 lines of code, but not 200, which is fine. And if we go to complexity and defects, order by complexity, and there are no methods more than 5 complexity. See? And even that user policy, let's open it up. The complexity is this one complexity and this method. So see, this and, or, and. This is kind of generating the complexity of 5, which is totally normal if you want to check a few conditions here and there. So this longer video, I hope it makes sense for you how to analyze your code and what metrics to look at, or what metrics to analyze in order to find the potential files or methods or classes to refactor for solid principles.